All right, so now that we've got our satellite texture mapped, we're going to quickly go through the basic steps in keyframe and animating our model using the timeline below. I'm going to go in and I'm going to select this rocker arm, and I've located the pivot point at the ball at the beginning here where it falls against the satellite body so that it articulates and rotates from that point in space. So if you find yourself with your geometry centered and you want to move that pivot to another point in your geometry, simply hold down D and V and you will feel your pivot point snap to the edges of your geometry. So now I'm just kind of rotating around to make sure it's kind of where we'd like it to be. I'll probably check this in my orthographic views just to make sure it's just about perfect. So I'll hold down D in this case alone and I'll center it like so. I'll confirm this from the top as well. I'll hit F to get on top of this. Once again, I'm going to hold down D and I'm going to locate my pivot there. So that means if I go in and animate this to rotate, it's going to rotate against the body of the satellite, which is where I would like it to be. I'm going to go over to my channels window, and in my channels window I'm going to keyframe this arm to rotate. I'm making sure that I'm at the beginning of my timeline down here utilizing this little VCR control, and I'm going to go up to the channel window and I'm going to click and drag through rotate XYZ and then right click and choose key selected, and you'll see that all of them have been key selected, and you can confirm that by looking at that red keyframe at frame 1. Now another thing you want to be aware of is that when you start to animate, be sure that over here in the lower right hand corner that little skeleton key has a red background. If it doesn't, click on it because you won't be able to drop any other keyframes without that activated. Now I'm going to pick an arbitrary number of perhaps 30 frames. I'll click on there. I'll hit E to get my rotation tool, and then I'll go in and I'll just introduce a bit of a rotation here, like so, and these 3 vertices. So if I was to drag back and forth in my timeline now, between those 2 keyframes, that function's taking place. Now another thing I want to be aware of in my shelf, I want to make sure that the tool graph editor appears on the shelf. It'll be like that white box with the blue check on top and then the abbreviation GE. If you don't see that, you would hold down Control Shift. You would go to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And you'll see how we'll be utilizing that in a moment. I'm going to shift and drag through the first keyframe. I know that I've got a keyframe selected when that keyframe turns to yellow. I can now right click, choose copy, go down the end of the timeline, maybe to frame number 60. I'll right click, choose paste, paste. So what I've effectively done is I've created this cycle that begins and ends at the same point. You'll see in a moment why I've done that. For the duration of my movie. So right now my animation ends at 60 frames. So if I was to play this now using the VCR controls down here, after it goes past 60 frames, it's static. And I want that function to be throughout the duration of my animation. So I'll do 2 things. First of all, I'm going to bump the frame range up down in this window of my animation, about 400. And then with that arm selected that I just keyframed, I'm going to click on the graph editor. When I look at the graph editor, I'll see those axes keyframe paths that we've just created. I'm going to hit A on the keyboard so I can see them all in their entirety. And I'm going to marquee select them like so. Inside the graph editor, I'm going to go up to curves and I'm going to choose post infinity and cycle. So now if I return to my timeline, play my movie again, this function will take place beyond 60 frames based on that curve post-infinity cycle. I'm going to stop it, Now, if I decided I wanted to edit this in any way that I wasn't too pleased with that function, I could use these controls on the lower right of the user interface. I can navigate to keyframes with the triangle and the red line through the rectangle. So if I want to go back or forward in time, I can move to a keyframe, and then I can change that function if I chose, and it would update throughout my animation. All right, so I'm going to stop it. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to animate the panel, solar panel. So I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to select the one at the end. I'll hit Command G to group, and I'm going to center the pivot. And I also want this to articulate right against the body of the satellite. So I'm going to go to my side view, hold down D, and I'll drag that right over the center of that sphere. I'll go to my top view to make sure that in fact it is centered in that view as well. Now I'll return my perspective view. I'll rewind to the beginning of my timeline. And in this case, I only want this to articulate on one axis, the x-axis. So I'll go over and I'll right-click on Rotate X, key selected. Maybe I'll go to 100 frames. I'll move this a bit, like so. And once again, I want it to be a cycle, and I want it to return to the same position it had in frame 1. So I'll hold the Shift key down, drag through the timeline. When I see that that first keyframe has turned yellow, I know it's good to go ahead and right-click and just copy. I'll move to frame 200, right-click, paste, paste. Once again, I would like this to go throughout the duration of my animation. So with that piece selected, I'll go back to the graph editor. I'll hit A on the keyboard so that I might see the whole keyframe line in the graph editor. I'll mark key selected. I'll go to curves, post infinity, cycle. So now if I was to return to my timeline and play it, I have my function. Now, let's say for hypothetical, I would like to remove that keyframe and make something a little less severe with the arm here. So once again, I'll navigate using the triangles with the red lines in front of them to the keyframe that is kind of what I'd like to change, which is the one in the center of my animation cycle. So I'll shift, drag through, right click, and choose delete. Now, while I'm there, I may as well perform another function. So I think what I'll do is I'll just have it kind of go up like so. So now if I drag through, it's just going up and down. And once again, that would take place for the duration of my movie. Now, let's say also for argument's sake, I didn't want it to go that quickly. It's a short cycle of 60 frames, and I'd like that to be more protracted. So once again, I'm going to hold the Shift key down, drag through all the keyframes so that they're all selected in yellow. If I go to the right triangle, there's a yellow triangle approximately about 68 here. If I was to click on that and drag, it'll extend the time frame of the animation. You can see that it's keeping the distance consistent in between this keyframe in the beginning, at the end, and this keyframe in the beginning. So it just kind of keeps them proportionally at a distance. I'm going to hit Command S to save. I'll hit continue. Now, perhaps I would like this function with the arm to start later on in my animation. Once again, I can shift and drag through all the keyframes. And then if I go to the center where they are the two opposing yellow triangles, I can click and drag that in time. And you'll see that the first keyframe is now located about 60 frames, which means this animation won't begin until 60 frames. So pretty much everything you need to do can be done in the timeline, holding the Shift key to delete, to move, to change the speed of. All those functions are a process of shift and drag, and then the submenu when you click with your right mouse.